Yo, how's it going, folks? Welcome to episode 173 of the Simpa Life Podcast. Another beautiful week has passed. Hope you've had a wonderful time. Another 7 days, another 7 sleeps. Yeah, I know I've been bitching about the weather. We're obviously into spring now, or at least we are when you're listening to this, because you don't know when we're recording these. So I can't actually mention the major news that's in the events right now, because who knows what's going to have happened by the month that's passed when this is released. So yeah, by the time I think for next week's episode, folks, we will be back on the timeline, so I can talk more about sort of news and current events without making it sound very, very weird as to why I'm talking about things potentially sometimes 6 weeks out of date. Without any more waffling about sort of housekeeping, which we'll do at the end as always, I'm just going to jump straight in introducing today's guest and getting this conversation going, because I think there's a lot here that you guys will benefit from and gain from. So without further ado, we'll jump over to introduce today's guest, who is a consultant psychiatrist, a prescriber of... This is where the language becomes difficult in my brain, because I don't use the words medical cannabis. So I've put consultant psychiatrist, prescription cannabis prescriber, which doesn't feel good in a literary sense, and co-founder of the Cardiff Cannabis Clinic. They are Dr Dave Howells? Howells?
Howells, yes.
Howells. Okay. I didn't want to say Howells, but Howells? Howells.
As in Howells at the moon.
Perfect. Right, not Howells. My Geordie wants to go Howells, as in how.
I'll answer pretty much anything. Don't worry about it.
Excellent. We got through there. I've done my introduction. How are you doing, Dr. Dave?
Excellent. Thank you for having me on. Yeah, really appreciate the work you're doing in getting the message out and courting controversy for the betterment of all.
I like that. I do like that. Yeah, controversy is my shadow, so may as well put some illumination to it where I can. Yeah, we were saying sort of in the preamble there before, just panicked. Yes, we are recording. Before we started recording, that we met. I'm thinking it's got to be at 4 years ago, because obviously it was lockdown. It was the first one after the lockdowns. The Global Cannabis March in Cardiff in Wales.
That's correct. We started Cannabis Clinic Cardiff in late 2021. And so our first public outing was to take our banner and our daughter to the Global Cannabis March and join in promoting this new medicine as something which could be available for many people. So we wanted to put our weight, such as it was, behind global cannabis and a discussion about new ways of interacting with that. And so, yes, we went down and say you were spearheading a fine collection of people with disparate views and backgrounds. And yeah, we appreciated it very much. And this was kind of our baptism of fire into this area, which we hadn't sort of realised was continuing to go on after the terrible sort of COVID times and lockdown.
Yeah, I think it was one of the first sort of meetings and public things that the community got to do again post lockdown. So I think for those that sort of could make it, it meant a lot. So you mentioned that you founded the clinic in 2021. Mm-hmm. So could you give us a bit more background of sort of how you first got involved with cannabis and how you set up and what sort of led you to establishing Cardiff Cannabis Clinic?
And as you mentioned, COVID was an interesting and varied time for everyone. People reassessed their lives. Working in the NHS had its own unique stresses, and coming home every day, stripping at the door and showering and trying to keep your family as safe as possible during those times. And then having my wife and daughter having a different experience of COVID really led to people reassessing how they were living, and certainly we were of the same ilk. My wife was very interested in sort of cannabinoid therapies, was watching videos and podcasts, particularly Professor Nutt, and she was watching one of those YouTube videos, and I came home and she went, guess what? Cannabis is legal. And it was, sort of 2020, 2021. And although you kind of heard it out to the corner of your eye, to mix metaphors, everyone kind of knew that children with epilepsy certainly were getting access to that and to be commended. But quite how liberalised that piece of legislation was in enabling other people to get prescriptions, really led us to go down that avenue for illnesses which my wife had, Sam. She had Crohn's disease and still has Crohn's disease. That was something which she's had for a very long time. And she had been, a covert cannabis user for her condition. And so that was something we had lived our sort of lives together as husband and wife. And she was certainly gaining benefit from that, but something we really had to keep under wraps. It certainly wasn't something I would tell my colleagues in the hospital. It was something that we tried to keep away from the school gates. You didn't want, that sort of stigma being attached to your daughter or ourselves. So when it became clear to us that my wife might be eligible for a medical cannabis prescription, she went off and found a clinic and managed to get a prescription, and just the pure relief of that was immense. We recorded that first day when she got her parcel through the post, and her face lit up, and we realised now this was something that we didn't have to be ashamed of and hide. And very quickly it became apparent that I was one of the few people in the country who had the right sort of qualifications and skills to be able to prescribe for other people within my specialty of psychiatry. And so it felt like paying forward some of that gratitude to the doctor who prescribed for my wife to prescribe for other people. And so that's really how this came about, with a desire to help people in the way that my wife had been helped. And that's the avenue we started going down.
Interestingly, the stigma is such a huge thing. It's something that I often, I'll admit, I forget about, because I just live so, caught controversy. It's it's having what. I'm trying to formulate a sentence here. I'm sorry, I've been out gardening all day, so I think I've used most of my my energy, so I'm trying to draw on it. How did it impact you and your wife then, having the smell of cannabis, the cannabis being around, suddenly being kind of not this taboo, but actually a point of, like, you could associate it with betterment rather than the potential tearing apart of the family, child services, loss of job, being struck off, etc. Like, how was that sort of an instant thing, or is it something you still sort of gradually feel? Because you said how you described living in the shadows, as it were, before, and obviously with what you do now, you're very much out in the light. So is that sort of a gradual transition? Was it a thing that you kind of got the prescription, you went, this is an instant thing, or was it a gradual journey?
It was certainly piecemeal, and having my wife using cannabis throughout the upbringing of our child, we realised that when she was going to secondary school, she would be exposed to that strange smell in the back alley and say, why does that smell like my mum? So we made the conscious decision that my wife, who up to that point had been in the ensuite quietly using cannabis and making sure there wasn't a smell around, to informing our daughter, and our daughter, amazing girl, took it all in a stride and never looked back. And her story is evolving, and we're immensely proud of her. In terms of being within the NHS, it wasn't an immediate, hey, guess what, guys, my wife's got a medical cannabis prescription, isn't this wonderful? There was still lots of stigma around, and within the NHS we see people who certainly should not be prescribed cannabis, and really we would want people not to be using cannabis when they're acutely unwell. And we've all seen those revolving door patients who start to get well, go out on leave, have cannabis, come back, and for whatever reason, because they're clearly getting some sort of benefit from cannabinoids, but using it in a very sort of uncontrolled way, not really knowing what they've got. And certainly during my training, there wasn't this sort of issue of spice and other substances sprayed and contamination, and the understanding of perhaps some of the implications of that. So just, I think, pure cannabis on itself isn't right for some people. But we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's certainly a great many people who do benefit or could benefit, even if they need to get over their own stigma. But to go back to the NHS, I didn't tell anyone initially. And it was only really when my hand was forced that, we really were going to be doing this. We really were going to be opening a cannabis clinic, that I then sort of took my immediate colleagues to one side in a peer session, because we have regular peer sessions and consultant discussions, and sort of said, this is what's happening, this is what I'm intending to do, which was sort of stunned people into shocked silence, I think. But everyone was very respectful of my position, and no one was criticizing at that point. And but in equal measure, there was no sort of encouragement or eager support for the route we were going down.
Interesting. I suppose I was going to ask you kind of later, but it kind of feeds in. Feeds into this question to this point now. Do you feel that there was more kind of worry given the nature of the field that you work in if you were in a different part of health that you wouldn't have, like if it was chronic pain, if it was palliative care, something like that? But because of the, like you said, of there are a very small, same with any drug population, group of people that just seem to have almost like an allergy type effect to it, that it just doesn't go well. There's initial parts and elements to it. It's like the same, like I don't drink, I don't like binge drink. So I gave that up. I recognised that once I got past 8 pints or whatever and people were still buying shots and and getting a blackout drunk, I was an arsehole. There was nothing good would ever come of that. It's like I remember I had a friend when I was younger saying nothing good ever happens past 2 o'clock, like 2 in. And so it took me years to recognise that actually, if I don't drink, I don't have to spend a week after I've been out dealing with the consequences I created when I drank. But then that's the same with some people with cannabis, with other substances, with food sources even, you know what I mean? There's people can get really difficult, addictive or dependent relationships on things like, I don't know, Krispy Kreme donuts. Other donuts are available. But it's yeah, do you feel that there was something extra of the stigma attached because of the working in psychiatry?
Well, working in psychiatry, we've all had training and discussions and workshops and lectures and conferences on addictions and substance misuse and the impacts of these. I would say that the training is woefully out of date, in that our medical schools up to very recently did not have any training on the endocannabinoid system. And that puts everyone at a disadvantage, that you're not familiar with the potential therapeutic uses of these medicines. Rather, you are just given a kind of one-sided view. What I find with psychiatrists and mental health in particular, it attracts people on two sort of ends of a spectrum of sort of openness. Some people are very conservative and think, well, if it's a substance of abuse, that people should not be using it at all in any circumstances, and there's no kind of grey areas there. At the other end, there's people and fabulous research going on around the world related to novel therapeutics, and indeed the psychedelics are a key sort of avenue of this these days, who are more open to these sorts of ideas. So it is polarizing. It can split opinion, but we're trained in a certain way that we can have respectful dialogue, and we're trained in assessing evidence, and that's one of the difficulties when we start to look into this in the NHS, which I'm sure we'll discuss, is what constitutes evidence, when there are clear hierarchies of evidence, and you play top trumps my evidence, tops your evidence. And there are various political, social, historical reasons why these novel therapeutics don't fit into those models. And there are always deficiencies in any model. But much like organizing society, you have to choose the least worst for your situation.
Interesting. I found the same thing, having been a patient in psychiatry for most of my life now. Oh my God, approaching 40s. Ooh, that was a horrible thing to think of.
It's better than the alternative.
I like it. Yeah, I like it. But yeah, I found the same thing, the exact same thing. It's like a Freud versus Jung kind of analysis of it. It's the people who are stuck in a very direct analytical A to B to C to D, and they're like, they know all drug bad. Why? Because thing that one time happened, so none. And then you ask them about alcohol or whatever, and they go, it's not a drug though. I'm going home and drink some Jack tonight and sit by the fire. And then the other side is kind of the ones who are, I feel I'm a little tapped. I'm going to go learn why I'm tapped. Get an idea of going, I'm not tapped. And then kind of want to help in that way. And so I feel it's those that want to give and build an awareness to it, and those that kind of want to label and box everything and make order of it. And that's their way of, both of them are trying to compensate for the fact that they're suffering from the human condition, that they are conscious, and it sucks, but it's beautiful, but it's crazy, and it's wonderful. And it's just like that wonderful yin and yang, of flow of it all. But yeah, I found it exactly the same thing, to be fair, in terms of the psychiatric professionals. Without giving too much of my kind of situation away, the last psychiatrist I saw, the level of bigotry that I received was pretty phenomenal. So I'd basically gone in for reassessment because since I was 11, I've not been allowed stimulant-based medications to treat my ADHD because I have drug-seeking behavior. Because, I've been very honest with my drug use, you know what I mean? I get a lot of benefit from things like DMT, MDMA, LSD, etc. These are not typical habit-forming substances. These are not neurological or physiological toxins or poisons. I mean, obviously some formulations of MDMA in high concentrations can become problematic. But without the caveat out of the way, you know what I mean? All of these things were used as tools to allow me to connect to a world. And then going into psychiatric sort of interventions would always be told that I'm connecting wrong, you're doing wrong. And I found a few people that were basically like, they'd kind of shut the book, the hour would be over, and they'd be like, da-da-da, off the record, as it were, and you could, you've just humanized. You've helped the TISM part of my brain recognize that I'm not being gaslit, that you go in, the NHS says I've got to, here's the thing. And because of a few people like that, I went on a journey. But this last individual, I'm not even going to give them gender because I don't want to give anything to reveal them away. They basically went, look, there is no formulation of anything that we can give you. There is this one SSRI, and I've had about 19 of them over my life. Like, I took a lot of them when I was younger because I believed sincerely they would help. Some of them, like venlafaxine, I lost a summer on that shit. Like, some of these are potent, powerful drugs that irreparably change your neurochemistry. Yet me then going, I'm going to go camping with 4 mates in the woods and take some LSD and cry around a fire and talk about God and love. And then saying that I'm bad for it. Like, it's the juxtaposition of it. And this psychiatrist, she went and she'd even gone and printed off recent analysis that went, cannabinoids interact with this. So actually this medication is useless, so we can't even prescribe you anything. And it was just the most like, I waited 10 months to get this meeting for you to make me feel like a horrible person. And off the back of it, I went and got a prescription to spite, to then go back, to then go, and I go, that's for depression. And I went, well, yeah, because if you look at my health records, depression is the thing that you people always keep saying. And the reason I'm depressed is you won't look at me for what I am. You want, do you know what I mean? Understand like the chronology of events, understand, yes, there's complex trauma. Yes, there's neurodivergency. And yes, the propensity towards drug use probably comes from something in those other things. But you then pathologizing that drug use and then saying bad, moralizing, or for-moralizing rather, then that negative compounding effect onto the other care. And now I don't even interact with them. I'm 4 years into a waiting list to basically put me in a room and go, yes, TISM confirmed. Like, it's absurd, this system that is so big. I've just gone on a rant, I've just got a shrink in front of me. I'm like, Dave, help me, Dave. But no, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just saying that the system feels a bit fucked. It feels a bit backwards because of, as you say, those people that even the ones that have that understanding will go and watch those YouTube videos in their free time or go and do that research. They're kind of hamstringed by the system. They're kind of prevented from actually really speaking their mind or providing, I would say, meaningful therapeutic intervention. Sorry, there's my rant over.
And I certainly wouldn't say that, modern psychiatry is the pinnacle of mental health care and will not be surpassed by any future models. That's certainly not the case. But, we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Psychiatric formulations are an important and integral part, which does look at biopsychosocial, environmental, spiritual aspects. And in its purest form, it's a really good way of dealing with any sort of trauma through pharmacological and non-pharmacological means. Is there a way to go? Yes. Can we incorporate this? Certainly, given the right sort of will and mindset and openness. Everyone goes into the caring professions because they want to help people. That's the basis of why we do what we do. And nobody wants to think that they're causing people harm. Indeed, do no harm is the first thing you're taught. However, we're limited in our structures and how, we engage with patients, and it does fail people. And certainly that extra layer of prejudice and stigma can blind some practitioners to what's in front of them. We get comfortable in what we're doing. I'm, certainly gone through several iterations of my views to do with mental health and various things we do within society and in medicine. So it's not a fixed point. And I think if we can prove that these approaches are superior to conventional medicines, then there's a vast number of people who would go on board with that. But doctors and medical professionals are difficult to convince, because the great fear is that there are unintended consequences, or that people are being sold a lie that there's a snake oil salesman around every corner promising and under-delivering on patient vulnerabilities.
Do you think do you think that it's become a sort of a problematic, it's become problematic in modern pharmacology that it's single symptom, single solution, as it were? I prescribe this for this. But cannabis, I mean, even under the current framework now, where are we, 2026, we're approaching 8 years under the current legislation, it's still prescribed cannabis flower as a cannabinoid delivery system, delivering a certain ratio of CBD to THC. Everything else is considered a contaminant. Yet those contaminants wildly and vastly change that product. It's like you were selling an opioid and going, oh, it's this to this, but then you had, oh, there's a contaminant in there, and it was crack. Like, there's other things occurring here, and like you said, it's the limitation of it, and that does create the benefit of some systems. But I do worry about the unintended consequences and the harms that could potentially come from all of us kind of looking and going, that car's going to crash, and everyone going, yeah, but we're supposed to let it. Do you know what I mean? I feel that's intrinsically against that do no harm, and I'm not saying I've never been prescribed by you, but some of the prescribers I've interacted with, I've spent longer with people serving me at fast food restaurants. And I've probably had more in-depth conversations with them in some ways as well. No offense to any of them out there. Whereas then, like I said, I asked to go and get a review for a medication to go and I had to go through loopholes and meet different people and go and get that meeting and go and have that thing and then be left so just not emasculated, but like emaciated, just left just sort of like emotionally drained by this thing to ask for something. Yet I don't know what, there's a question in here somewhere. I'm still ranting about just thinking about my previous interactions with psychiatric care over here. But yeah, like it's fit for purpose because it's serving some purpose, clearly. But there are a lot of people falling through the cracks. And I think around mental health, particularly around prescribing, like I'm prescribed, as I said, for depression. Yeah, I take it for the autism and the ADHD. But the nature of them prescribing, you need more of a specialist, more of a thing. It can then face more scrutiny. Whereas then if I'm just on the depression, which is the comorbid condition in all of these things, it's easier. And again, is that going to harm then the data sets? Is that going to harm future evolution? Is then the development? There's too many questions here. But is then this single symptom, single solution going to lead to exact formulations that go, oh, you hurt your knee, here's the knee cannabinoid? Do you know, that's an oversimplification, but you know what I'm saying? No,
I can pull out a thread in that. That's fine.
Thank you.
I mean, again, just to recognise the advances that we've had in mental health in the medical field. We once locked up people for what would be termed moral insanity, which would be out of wedlock births, and I'm sure substance misuse and alcoholism and all these things. So, we have advanced, but we have to recognise where we've come from and the advances we've made to that, where, people with schizophrenia say were locked up and there was no therapy, to the point whereby we've got some of these powerful medications which can literally save lives and improve quality of life. So that's an example of a one receptor, one drug medication. So too much dopamine in the wrong areas for people with schizophrenia, we give you a dopamine blocker, to put things very, very simply. And that can really stabilize people with that condition. So, we do randomized controlled trials, and that gives you an answer to a very narrowly defined question. And the key with research is the question. What is the question you can ask, which will give you the answer, which you can say with confidence that this is not as a result of random chance. And over time, you build up on that evidence base, and combine all of those studies together to get meta-analyses, and you do systematic reviews, and you can tell with a fair degree of certainty that this one condition with this one drug for this one receptor is, doing something beneficial that is not just by chance. And they've also then got the data for side effects. So, in my career, I've prescribed medications which had evidence that they could potentially be harmful to the people I'm prescribing for, but that's a known consequence. I can say, yes, the risk of stroke here goes from 1% to 3%. It's still a low risk, but their risk is there. But on the flip side, the evidence is that this medication will improve those really difficult symptoms, which could result in you or others coming to harm. So it's that balance, and it's that sort of clarity of a statistical approach, which is really appealing, knowing something because you've got that granularity of evidence is appealing. And then on the flip side, we've got a botanical product with hundreds of different active chemicals. Only two we really list on a certificate of analysis. Whereas with 350 plus ongoing cultivars in the UK of medical cannabis, how do you disentangle all of that and determine what's going on when it addresses many, many different receptors in the body? So all those botanical elements interacting together in potentially positive and or negative ways leads to an incredibly messy real world situation. And if you're, a purist and really like your data to be clear, then this is going to be a struggle for you. So people with that sort of rigid mindset aren't going to like that. But then on the other side, you've got people who, take a more nuanced approach and more humanistic approach and more philosophical approach. But, the NHS and Nice Guidance and Royal Colleges all worship at the altar of evidence-based medicine. And that's going to be tricky to overcome. And I'm not sure, we will overcome that as, medical prescribers, and potentially this model, which we've got now, may be numbered. The days may be numbered.
It feels like the profitability of the drug producers and the way that licensing kind of worked. We got a look at that with Purdue and kind of the rebranding of oxycodone. If you remove, as is seemingly the wave across Europe right now, is in all of the guidance, is they're moving away from the prescribing of opioids. We've obviously been stepping away from benzos and things like that for a good minute in the UK, having seen what's gone on there. Things like gabapentin, etc., are now being sort of scheduled as, having a criminal offence for possession without prescription. Unless we look at botanical therapeutics, unless we look at, herbology and aromatherapy and things like that, there's stuff there. We can't just turn our back to it and go no, and then we've built this industry on pain being a huge thing. Let's give them this thing that actually on long term will increase pain but increase profits for the top. Then we will remove it and not provide an alternative. And cannabis, like I said, in anecdotes and in kind of not necessarily full controlled scientific studies, especially not double-blind placebo-controlled studies, because how do you get a placebo-controlled study for smoking or vaping cannabis? It don't work in that way. And like I said, because of the complex pharmacokinetics of it, it's incredibly difficult. So yeah, I don't see it fitting into this model, but I see it being allowed to open in a peripheral model, but it would have to work in tandem with traditional healthcare to have a practitioner and have it under guidance. Like I said, with the printout that then goes, yeah, worst you could die, you know, and then like a list of, oh my God, yeah, but it's actually 100 million people who have taken this and yet 12 got this, but we have to do it because 12 got it. And so as a botanical, the plant can't fit into it, because then the issue is most of the things are targeting specific receptors, specific sites. But then we understand cannabis to be way more than just CB1, CB2. There's a multitude of other receptors, but then there's obviously this information coming out of them being basically on-site membrane active neurotransmitters. And so we see, if you look at synthetic cannabinoids, or so-called synthetics like spice, the overactivation in them and giving almost schizoid type reactions, we can extrapolate from that, at least theoretically, that, oh, then cannabinoids are having this singular effect on top of all of the other things that we're monitoring. And so in some people, there's an overactivation and underactivation. Then that's just like I said on the main cannabinoids. We're even then still in the dark ages of CBD's non-psychoactive. So put that in and look at it. See the other peripheral pathways that it works on in terms of serotonin and dopamine. You know, low dose, it's a stimulant, and at high dose, it's a sedative. Like, most things don't play like that. What's going on there? Like, there's a lot more complex going on there. Like I said, I don't think that if we wait for, you know, the Harvard studies, Oxford Royal College they'll go, oh, what we've done is we took one cannabinoid, we isolated it down, we bound it in this compound and and in this one specific nuanced group of 100 people that have got this one condition, it helps 53% of them. Like, while what, criminalizing and arresting the rest of us? Like, I was just reading as you came on. Last year, we lost a pub a day. Telegraph have just published some article having a going, oh my God, why are all of the empty pubs being turned into cannabis farms? It's like, because we don't want alcohol anymore. We want the cannabis. We're not wanting the opioids, we're wanting the cannabis. And if the systems are not going to catch up, the culture will. And obviously there's things that can benefit from that. There are potential negatives, because like you said, there are not necessarily a snake oil salesman behind every door, but you can knock enough doors, you'll find enough of them. And we're in that weird thing where people don't know who to trust anymore. The idea, some people speak of like this physician supremacy, an idea of a doctor going, well, I trained for 10 years, I've done all this lecturing, I know better than you. But that person with the lived experience, like, yeah, but doc, for 30 years I've used this and it benefits me. You can't deny that. So, yeah, how do we get around this? Is there, I mean, you're in a difficult position in terms of where you sit with it. Like, do you see the path you're on splitting at some point, and the NHS and traditional healthcare kind of locking down more and going, no, we'll use cannabinoid formulations, like synthetic formulations, because, you know, lab testing, and move away from the botanicals? Could you?
Absolutely. I think you'd find it very difficult to have a pharmaceutical company take on a botanical product to do the kind of millions upon millions of pounds worth of research on that one particular product, because then that formulation, if tweaked, is a completely different medication. You know, research has to happen with standardized products, and it's very difficult to standardize a botanical medicine. So I do see that, you know, this won't be an acceptable method of treatment until there are patented medications from drug companies who, yes, will make those profits for singular conditions and have the evidence to back that up. So it could potentially be that we look back on these days as some of the best days of cannabis liberalization. Because once you've got a medication for a condition that's available on the NHS and has that evidence base, well, why do you need to then go out and get this botanical medicine? So I think there is a fear on my part that, you know, we will see a clampdown on these kind of botanical products once that process is in place. Now, that's probably a long way off. And so in the meantime, we've got plenty of people getting benefit, and my anecdotes are as frequent as anyone else working in this space. But they are a self-select group. Most of them have already used cannabis and found benefit. So that does skew the data a bit. But anecdotally, the results I'm getting and the results I'm seeing far outweigh almost any other therapy I've seen. But that's my experience isn't evidence in the same way that your experience isn't evidence, even though on an N=1 research study you're doing on yourself, It is. And so should you be criminalized for that? I would say absolutely not. We're all supposedly have free will. That's another argument entirely. But we're all making our journey through this world as best we can. And I believe most people are, good actors and want the best for themselves and other people and aren't looking to harm others. But there's always exceptions to the rule, particularly where there's large amounts of money being made through illicit activities.
Yeah, no, wait, or illicit activities, to be fair, as well, wherever there's just large amounts of money. It's interesting because it's coming down to a point of, if then I was a doctor and you were like, oh, I've got a patient who's got an internal inflammatory issue with blah, blah, blah. Obviously, we then have the conversation of, well, what's your diet, exercise, what you did, other peripheral stuff. But then I was going, so I could give them cannabis and it's got anti-inflammatory properties and they'll have a euphoric reaction to it and they might enjoy themselves a bit. She's been struggling to go out for a walk. Maybe she'll go out in nature and enjoy that. Rather than, this tablet, then, the cumulative effects of this is actually liver toxicity. So actually, if she keeps on this for more than 6 months, I'm going to have to prescribe her this. And that it's a no-brainer to me. I understand, obviously, then that if you're trained in that data set and you're going and you're constantly getting re-educated into the latest and greatest within the industry or within the field, why can't we have this? Why are we so averse to this conversation in medicine of enjoyment and connection? Because that's the other big thing. If cannabis, especially the people that you said are self-selecting, they come from a thing of going, I've got some weed, go with the mates, let's consume it together. And that is part of the healing. That is part of the medicine, as it were. Yet modern, westernized standard of like the pharmacological sort of medicine looks at that and goes, no, you shouldn't really be enjoying this. Is it kind of a hangover from Catholicism, or like what is lingering in this space?
I suppose if you look at any kind of behavior, you get subgroups into it, and people who are dependent on alcohol very often are taught that they should avoid the cues, they should avoid the times when it's dangerous, they potentially should avoid the people with whom they drank, because that leads to them to have these cues which result in the cravings, which will result in the relapses. So, that would be, I think, the counter argument to saying that this is community, saying this is bad community. However, you're right in that in a regulated system, going to, watch the football or rugby with your friends on a Saturday, having 1 or 2 pints under the UK guidance, of course, is a healthy thing to do and forms bonding experiences. And yes, the subcultures can be supportive at their best. And I would want to see supportive communities and cultures that educate and are able to help people if they do get into trouble. So yes, people need that sort of societal bond. And I have seen people who are able to get out of their house for the first time in 10 years because they've started using cannabis and feel that gives them that access. And indeed, people who have trauma in their lives who are able to go into therapy for that trauma simply because they have got that cannabis. So it's not a be all and end all, cannabis or nothing. It's, how does that integrate into that wider biopsychosocial environmental model?
As I kind of alluded to before about the pubs, I've mentioned this before on the podcast of alcohol. We went, okay, we've got this, Schedule 1 carcinogen, this neurological, physiological toxin. People love to consume it. What can we do? All right. Create infrastructure. All right, we can't have them in the cars. Boom, taxis, sweet. All right, they're gone the drink. Oh, let's turn it off at a certain time. All right, let's fill them full of food, suck up all the alcohol. Do you know what I mean? Oh, they might get a bit violent. Well, have some bouncers. Make them really friendly, though, until the moment they don't need to be. Letting them build all this infrastructure around this human activity. Yet they go, there's some bunch of people over there want to consume that plant. All right, let's put CCTV, let's get police down here, let's raid their houses, let's search their phones, let's sort of follow them on social media. Like the different approaches, yet the cannabis pub, put us in the pub. We're already trying to grow the weed there. You've got all of the infrastructure, pool tables, darts board. You've got like the bar area. You can switch that out into, non-alcoholic drinks and food. If you maybe later on we can have that conversation about putting the license in for alcohol. But then it's got individual booths, seating areas, commons area. It's got space for social events. Like, the infrastructure is there, same with working men's clubs, and we're kept out of that. And I was wondering, do you see much of, because I felt it as the placebo effect. I mean, I've always been able to fight my corner, but then having that little bit of paper in my pocket and someone being a dick and like, I'm a buddy boy. Like, the people that are agoraphobic, that are hidden away, that are scared, as I used to be before I started all of this. I mean, I was massively, like, I was scared of my own post box going to be sanctions from the benefits. But I had so many occasions where, like, I got kicked out of a Beans on Toast gig in Portsmouth, and I literally got hooked by the guard, the security dude, like, it's going back in. He's like, you smell a weed, got to search. I'm like, do you have the power to search it? And basically got threatened and thrown against the thing, got my weed taken off me and kicked out. And I'm like, that was the last time I went to a music gig, because I'm done with this. Even with the scripts now, I've got to lie and say that, yeah, I'm going to vape it. Vaping hurts my head. I've got a Volcano. I've got a Pax. I've tried the products. I've tried it doesn't do shit for me. Yet 3 draws on a blunt, even before that, the ritual of calming to put it together and that, I'm already calming. I'm already getting down to the tap, 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 dum, dum. But then having to lie and pretend and have like I used to do in Newcastle Airport, like have my vape here and then have like a joint here. So I could be looking, I'm vaping, so it smells of weed because I'm vaping. Like, ugh. But for people that get benefit from vape, sorry about my side rant there, how do you quantify this whole thing of like the placebo effect, I guess, of them feeling they can be integrated, they're safer to go outside. So then they all of a sudden, I'm engaging more, I'm out and da-da-da. How much of that then can be related to cannabis or can be related to the prescription itself that allows them to feel safe smelling of weed, going out with weed on them?
Yeah, I think there's 50-50. I think there's an enormous number of people who do feel that they can now go out and about with their cannabis vaporizer, or indeed take a vape cartridge out, which doesn't look or smell very much like cannabis, and have that confidence that if, they're out with their colleagues in a situation and they're starting to get stressed, they can go outside, no one knows what they're doing, have a quick vape, go back inside and carry on the day. Whereas previously they'd extract themselves terrified and run off home so that they can get their medication. So anything which engages people in healthy activities, I'm certainly all for. And yes, when you've been pulled out and held up and had your cannabis taken off you, that is again all part of societal stigma through multi-generational prejudice and propaganda. So yes, the brainwashing will take a while to undo. And in the meantime, we have to work out a way to reintegrate this into, wider society. We did meet with a Business Wales conference at some point and talked to a man who distributes grants. And we said, well, what about these vape lounges? These are springing up, which we're very pleased about, safe places for people to go. He said, well, we provide grants for community pubs, so the community can go to them and have that sense within that environment with some grant money from the government. There's no reason why vape lounges should not be the same. So potentially there is an avenue to have government support behind these community projects. We're at a point now where hopefully, more and more people are going to understand that cannabis is an option and it's legal, and that stigma and prejudice should become minimal, and hopefully reasonable accommodations within pubs, in the same way that you have vaping tents or shelters for people who want to vape outside pubs, maybe have the same sort of thing for cannabis users, which at the moment they tend to get lumped in with the vapors, and vapors don't necessarily want them there. The cannabis people don't necessarily want to be in a smoking tent either.
Yeah, I mean, as we discussed on episode 169, I think it was 169, 168, with Guy Coxell and Sal and Umesh, the law is in a pretty terrible state around alcohol at the minute, because most cannabis packaging says do not drink alcohol. So if you drive and you drink, you could potentially invalidate your Section 5A defence for driving with cannabis if you go to a pub. So until they sort that whole mess of shit out, it's going to become problematic. I think the issue as well around the artificial thing of the combustion of cannabis being the only consumption method of any prescribed drug in this country being prohibited is monstrous. And I think that's going to cause, and already is causing, sort of two-tier issues and problems. as my last guest, Cy Harrison from Jersey, raised last week. Well, will be last week's episode when I release these. We were talking about then how is it that the cannabis that is prescribed that gives you that piece of paper, gives you lawful possession of that product. If you set it on fire, you break the law. Yet, if you have cannabis and you smoke it, smoking that cannabis isn't unlawful. Being in possession of it is. So it creates these weird problems in the law that it's going to become more problematic. A lot of these vape lounges, I saw actually, I need to look at the interview, it's here in front of me, of should Wales free the weed? And there's an interview in that with, I've forgotten his name, the guy from Cardiff Cannabis Seed Bank. And when Product Earth paid me to go around the country to I went to 200 shops. That was the thing I said to everybody that had a spare room. Vape lounge, let's open this up. It's great to see he's one of the people that have done this. But a few of the people I've spoken to in the years that have come since then, they're really struggling for custom because either you let people smoke it and you risk your license, or people don't turn up. Because the majority of people, and I hear this off the record from quite a few prescribers, people still combust it. You carry the vape. Obviously, I've got a vape in the car. Yes, officer, I've got my vaporizer as per the law, as per precedent they've set by prosecuting somebody for having their prescription without their vaporizer. So I think there's issues that I think we've got the first rough idea, the blueprint of it. But if we don't lay these foundations correct, everything we build upon this is going to be a shack of shit. I like that, a shack of shit. A house of cards, to use an old parlance. How do you think that we can avoid that from, I don't want to say your side, I don't want it to seem like this side, but from the inside yourself as a prescriber, that because you've had this connection with, the legacy culture, you can kind of see the duality of it. And is this something that other people like yourself on the inside are kind of aware of these issues? Like, are prescribers aware of the amount of people combusting, the amount of people that are not misrepresenting, but are the main benefit they're getting is the paper, not the product, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly see people who I would describe somewhat fig leaf prescribed patients, that they're using their medical prescriptions of fig leaf for their other activities, which may be that they're using cannabis from the illegal market still. I think that's human nature. People will gravitate towards things they're familiar with, and many people do feel that some of the products they have from the illegal market are superior to the medical market. I'm not here to say one way or the other, but not everybody has access to good quality cannabis. A great many people have access to really bad quality cannabis, which is potentially contaminated, et cetera, et cetera. So, I would always say that, the medical route is the safer, because at least then that it's to a certain standard, even if it doesn't necessarily meet the full needs that you're saying that you get from cannabis from an illegal source. That links on to the smoking aspect of thing. In the absence of good quality evidence one way or the other, you have to go on what you think would be the most clinically appropriate advice. And inhaling burnt things, in my view, sounds like it would probably be a greater risk to health than inhaling from a vaporizer device, which does not burn things. So my advice is always that you use a vaporizer, even if you are telling me very truthfully that you get more benefit from smoking it. Now, again, do I think you should be prosecuted for doing it? No, I don't. I don't think prosecuting people for victimless crimes is a very sensible way of going forward as a society. But from a medical perspective, I have to give my best guess clinical estimate based on incomplete evidence.
100%. I'm not going to tell that anecdote because that's just going to cause too many issues. But many years ago, I'm going to tell the anecdote, but I'm definitely not going to mention the people and the thing because, a lot of water under bridges. A report came out. It was around 2020. No, it was 20. I think it was 2019 because it was just before things got locked in. About volatilization of spores in molds found in botanicals, and sort of slow heating them versus then combusting them in terms of then eradication. The chemical breakdown of heavy residues found in the botanicals were eviscerated in combustion because of zero to heat rather than sort of the slow build. The other one was heavy metals. That's the thing I've never quite understood about prescribing is if you're saying I can't smoke it, fair, you're saying, why isn't there then a standardized product on the industry? I know obviously Stork and Bickle and players like that are moving towards being air quotes first medical vaporization devices, but there doesn't seem to be a standardization on those materials. But if you are continually heating and cooling metal, anybody that knows anything about how the world works, you need to know what is that metal. You need to know what is in those parts. How long should that thing go? For 3 months? Oh, you're a heavy user, you got to replace it every month. Like, without any of that guidance and patients is left to their own, they go on the internet and then there are these influencers and people in the groups just going, oh, well, get this, use my code, da-da-da. And it's a lot of imported, mass manufactured, maybe a fresh new sticker put on top of it. I'm quite worried about that. Same with the carts. I trust flour because I've grown and been around flour for decades that I can look at it, pick it apart, smell it. And obviously you still can't get 100% accurate with anything, but there's enough that you can be like, I don't feel comfortable consuming that. When that's then being sort of reduced down and into an oil, and then again with carts sort of leaking, overheating, I get why it is what it is, and I appreciate you saying that best decision on incomplete evidence. Do you think that a part of the reason could be that what happened with tobacco was that the companies hid the data for so long and like got, 8 out of 9, wait, out of 9 doesn't make sense, 9 out of 10 doctors smoke Camels or whatever. I think that was the advert. And the way that's kind of evolved, and smoking is smoking. I mean, that's what the law recently, obviously, Green Party and a few others have been really trying to figure this out, the nuance of if we ban smoking, what are you really saying? Are you saying stop smoking tobacco or stop smoking? Because, I mean, well, I suppose technically you vape crack, but do you know what I mean? Like, there's other things that you can then smoke and combust. There's a whole herbal range of other products that you can set on fire and consume. There's like rose... Rose and what's the other thing? They sell the cigarettes, like marshmallow leaf and stuff like that. All these kind of things that are then considered to be less harmful combustibles. But do you think the association of then cannabis to this is causing the problem? Because obviously all the studies that we're looking at, COPD, lung cancer, etc., keep coming back and saying cannabis ain't doing this.
Yes, I think the hangover from the tobacco industry and the nefarious practices certainly does play into this. And this feeds into the, first do no harm kind of approach. I take your point that, nobody really knows what reheating coils or vape devices due to the potential heavy metal degradation is certainly a concern, and it's that unintended consequence that we stop you from doing one way, and there could potentially be harms associated with another way. And certainly I am concerned about people with nicotine vapes reusing the same coil over and over again and getting that degradation. And I've heard similar arguments for vape devices. I think the disposable vape carts probably aren't quite in the same league, just simply because the amounts people use are significantly less, and you throw it away at the end. You don't reuse those. And that would potentially then result in an argument that we should all use oils, and that's an avenue which so the MCCS and some guidance is saying that's what you should use. CBD oil, add in a bit of THC. I view that as a separate category of drug altogether. You're getting the benefits on the metabolized form. You're not getting the direct
the 11-hydroxy
into your system. So, the fact we have medications which can work almost instantly for patients and they can self-titrate is incredibly powerful. And, that's something which, is not something we have on the medical market. We don't have in the NHS, an inhaled anti-anxiety agent which works almost immediately.
Sorry, it's complete sideways. You've jumped into my brain. Esketamine. Is esketamine available in the UK?
I mean,
because that's what they describe it as, like an instant onset kind of.
Yeah. And it's an expensive patented form of ketamine. I do have a colleague who did a intravenous ketamine trial with a patient and wanted to set up a clinic, but hasn't been able to get through those political hurdles. So, ketamine IV is incredibly cheap. If you want nasally insufflated ketamine, you're paying thousands in a private clinic. It's not something I'm aware is in the NHS, but has, again, one of these novel therapeutics with immense potential benefits. And it's an exciting time for, psychiatry to be in this position of having a new set of tools to deal with. I've watched my colleagues get their genetically modified pig hearts for transplantation and go, where's my genetically modified pig heart? Well, potentially we've got this whole sort of Pandora's box or treasure trove, whatever you want to say, of different medications we could potentially trial in clinical settings to find out how to use these in the best way possible.
Yeah, sorry, just to sidebar a bit, I just popped in my brain because I was just thinking again of like, it's going to be easier for esketamine and like Numbrino, the cocaine nasal spray, I think it's Johnson & Johnson maybe, for these to get onto the market and to become more acceptable, and are then going to cause peripheral problems in the cocaine consuming population, for example, with Numbrino, as in this perceived hypocrisy or whatever. Yet we look at David Nutt's measure of harms of drugs and go, cannabis down here. And we're going, yeah, but devils. And they're going, but there's no criminalization of the consumption methods of any of these substances. Like we would have conversations about, how to take heroin, or you can inject, you can smoke, there's clearly, obviously, some are less harmful than others. Yeah, the system goes, don't use heroin. And you're like, but then if it was prescribed and you get your Oromorph or your whatever, it's, and the issue... I agree that we need the medical practitioner guidance, but it's weird that it doesn't seem to inform cultural use. And if then there is cultural use of compounds that clearly have medicinal benefit, surely then the overusage in the culture is a representation of a failure of the system to provide service. Like I had a friend, speaking of ketamine, who had a massive ketamine problem. Manic depressive most of his life. It was the one thing that helped. But then with his escalating tolerance and everything else, and then because of... well, frankly, like shame spirals created by his behavior upon it meant that we had to be more dissociated to not be grounded in his own life, and just spirals. And with the right guidance, with the right input, with that rather than being cooked up powder in somebody's kitchen at 4 a.m. and it being a little thing where it go different kettle of fish, but then to over pathologize that, I feel like we just need a big, much rounder bubble. I feel like if we could just draw it around and go, right, so is it human and is it health? Yes. Sweet. Doesn't matter then if it's medical, medicinal, recreational, whatever terminology. Are people using a thing? How do we do no harm? How do we reduce that harm? And it seems like that conversation can only happen once to go, medicine. Now it's a medicine, we can do what we like, but those street users, fuck them. And I don't know how to get beyond that binary, and that's why for so long, it's why I'm deliberately trying this yourself and quite a few other doctors on this sort of iteration of the podcast I'm trying to get on, because I'm trying to get over my kind of rage at the system that is supposed to benefit people, help people like me, that I'm now approaching my 40s, like I said, and I'm still at war with yous. Not you personally, Dave, obviously. I like you. You're good people.
Appreciated. I mean, on a societal level, medicine is just one part of human experience, and we're here to help people overcome, psychological or physical insults and traumas. We're not necessarily here to dictate what society should do. And, even though we have sort of public health specialisms where people can advise, and that's, again, other discussion, but the politicians do not have to listen to the medical profession. And very often, as with Professor Nutt's delineation of harms, just simply because something from a medical and scientific perspective would make sense, politics is created in a different ilk. There are different pressures and lobby groups and considerations, and we're not necessarily looking at this from a purely scientific perspective. We have to think, well, societally, politicians will vote for things when they become expedient to them remaining in office. And so we have to have a societal change before we can have a political change. But there'll be a tipping point. I think, we're on that road. And unless there's significant changes to the way that medical access is policed, governed, run, which it may be. We can't, not saying this is a direct sort of A to B. We may have to go by a C, D, E, F to get there. And, it may be closed down at any point. That's one of the inherent dangers of working in this area, is that you never know when the rug might be pulled from under you, even though you believe that what you're doing is the best for the public at large and the biggest professional bang for your buck. This is what we go into medicine for. We want to make the best, biggest change to the most people in a professional way. And that's how I came into this. This became very clear very quickly that I could get benefits to patients more so than I could within the NHS. Walking around my wards saying, that person could benefit, that person could benefit. Why don't we try this? There was no avenue to incorporate this into mainstream medicine. So I left the NHS 2 years ago, just simply to focus on this. It may result in, the consequences coming back around to bite me and other prescribers on the bum. But I feel this is the right choice for me at this time.
No, I respect that. And I'd never really thought of that. I'd never really thought of that, of the risk that a lot of you guys are actually taking, that if the winds do switch, I've always thought of it from the consumer side, from the culture side. But you guys could be hung out pretty heavily to dry. I mean, one of the things I've been looking at the past couple of years happening around Europe in terms of the investment vessels around entheogenic compounds, sort of classic novel psychedelics, or what they've been called now, novel psychedelics. Again, because of the nature of them, their molecular makeup, their pharmacokinetic activity within sort of the body and their makeup, they look like they're going to get through a lot easier. So I feel like cannabis is almost everything else that was behind it is going to skip the queue. Weed's still going to be, but I think the rest of medicine will almost catch up and go, look, every single other drug we demonized, we now have some valid use for. Like some novel application. Like, again, I'm not going to name it because you're out with the scene, but I watched somebody who suffered chronic pain their whole life when we did a circle of DMT, one of the Borough Fests a few years ago, be pain-free. And then watch him come out of it and just crying with joy and just like being so grateful. And it's like, the researching, no one is really looking at dimethyltryptamine and pain relief. And it then comes down to this. A few weeks ago, we had a conversation. God, but then it's so out of order. Had a conversation about sort of how like pain relates to sort of consciousness, and sort of how cannabinoids versus opioids help in sort of pain relief, and that something like DMT, as profound as that took his thinking away, didn't turn off the opioid receptors and turn down the pain network. It just put something else in the slot, and so that novel experience, even if it doesn't have that measurable effect in the classic approach to it of going, well, we've given this a reduced, what's your pain scale, to 2, like you can't have that sort of as profound as that, but something from that could be created. And we're obviously seeing that now with like LSD without the high. I know I've rallied, me and Dennis McKenna had a real rally against the system. I'm going to get him back on actually to have a conversation about some of the new approaches and applications to see if we both still are full of such sort of anger and annoyance, because we believe like the trip is part of the healing. But what if the trip is the expression of the healing? So actually, if you could condense that into it, and instead of it then just being a pharmacokinetic response in the body and just you still being normal in your conscious level, but to whatever the thing is going, that it's still having some sort of effect on the consciousness. And I think that's why we see depression arise as a secondary symptom in so many conditions, because it's this the treatment that they're getting is, yes, helping the thing, but it's not. There's not an extra oomph. There's not an extra like kick up the arse. You know what I mean? And I think that's what people are finding in cannabis is there's something extra there. They're going, oh, well, that pain's down, and for some reason I really want to go X, Y, Z. I haven't done this in years. Let's go da da da. There's something in that inspires that kind of creativity. I think a lot of these novel compounds, they have that, but not as fast acting. Like I said, cannabis of onset of like boom, 60 seconds, let's go. Something like LSD, I described it on the BBC as having like a positive hangover. But it lingers for the long time afterwards. And so basically, I'm just still saying I can see there being a way of them working within some sort of therapeutic settings. But do you think then there'll be an acceptance of, or will there end up being like trip clubs or something? Because part of the healing of psychedelics, like, or even I'm going to class MDMA in this, is that connection with others, is that ability to almost act as each other's psychiatrist and openly, vulnerably, rawly express to each other and heal each other and be like, I see you. And in that evening, do as much as 8 months, 10 months of direct invasive CBT or whatever.
Okay, I think there's two elements I'd like to address out of that. First is I went to the Royal College of Psychiatrists Congress, International Congress last year in Newport, and the standout themes for me was of neuroinflammation. So they're looking for ways to treat neuroinflammation, which is now recognized as being a great contributor to depression and many other conditions that plague mental health. And what struck me there was, yes, that these things such as cannabinoids and LSD have powerful anti-inflammatory effects. And so from a biological perspective, there's a good reason to think that there may be activity we could use if we can harness it. From going along the sort of medical line, if you're going to study these novel compounds, you need very expensive studies which have sitters and pre-therapy, integrative therapy, post-therapy. So that's what costs a huge amount of money to demonstrate that that model with that particular perspective can have a positive effect on people versus you having, an experience with friends in an uncontained environment with all the messiness that comes on with human existence. May have therapeutic benefit, but also may have unquantified harm in the wrong hands. And the more people who experience that, the more that, percentage of people, which stays the same, will increase the number of people having bad experiences and potentially vulnerable people being exposed to things where they might not necessarily have done otherwise. So there's no free lunch. There's always going to be, harms associated with things that are of benefit. But on a biological level, it makes sense. And when you look at the trip experience, that is, by definition, has a neurophysiological basis to it. So, you're taking a substance which alters your biology, which, if you think about consciousness as an epiphenomenological symptom of that underlying biology, your consciousness just reflects that underlying biology in its actions. And so I can see the point that if you have something which takes away that experience, then it may not have the same underlying therapeutic benefit. But, we are all, a bag of chemicals at the end of the day, and trying to work out which chemicals are beneficial, which might cause harm is an art as well as a science.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, as you were sort of speaking there, my brain always just resonates again on alcohol and tobacco, that obviously if they were to come about today, not a chance in hell. You go, why do you want to sell poison to people? Like, they'd just be like, no, it's not going to happen. But they are and they exist, and so we regulate and do what we can. We regulate and do what we can. Obviously, we have our units per but we recognise free will, if we wanted to go into that sort of argument of people can choose and go, you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to have a month's worth today. And there isn't the restrictions or barriers upon it. They could maybe go in and then see their GP, and the GP goes, oh man, you should really, come on. But what most people then do is go, yes, doctor, I only had 2. And we end up with that broken sort of data set. But I feel that it's because it's in medicine. If we could have this little adjunct, little bit extra that was just outside of medicine, so it wasn't about the benefit. It was like, well, how much harm does it really do? We need that element to these things. Of then going, okay, so where are the harms in it? The harms isn't in them taking it. The harms is, if they take it near water. I'm trying to think whose celebrity person died from complications of interactions with psilocybin and water and drowned. I was reading some story the other month. But yeah, you then go, well, don't trip near the water edge. Like, basic sense, do you know what I mean? So then in the pub, say, with the beer garden, we have it well lit. Or people can force you have a minimum height, a maximum height for the fencing and stuff like that. The bench has got to be a certain amount apart. Like, it's those kind of infrastructural improvements and then the social improvements that can be made into that if you allow people to feel responsible, they'll take responsibility. That's what I believe I've found through the events that I've run and everything else that we do with those down the garden. And if we give people the tools, and if it was part of the regulations of the sales, that, oh, you go, where are you going? I'm going to buy some acid. You got your acid and you got your little pull-out leaflet. And, there was a number to call, or like a QR code or whatever. It's a recommended trip sitter, onset and time, strength, like all these things are actually onto this thing. So you can make an informed decision, because most people, for their own sort of experience, and want to be in control. We have this argument all the goddamn time with illicit heroin use, is that, the fact that you're getting a shandy one day and an absinthe the next, people are not trying to kill themselves. It's the plethora of adulterants, it's the lack of the continuity of the product, it's their tolerance, so many other variables that are going into this that we could be dealing with, but because it's left in the realm of criminalization, or it's not good enough yet to get into medical, so therefore it's just left to, like you said, the human experience. And there are, unfortunately, bad actors in spaces that can and will take advantage of vulnerable people. I mean, that can happen and does happen in town centres up and down the country on Friday and Saturday nights under the influence of alcohol. But again, society kind of go to, and obviously...
That's not hitting the headlines, is it?
Well, it's not.
Ongoing harms of weekend alcohol binging. If you've ever been to A&E on a weekend, Friday, Saturday night, it's like a bomb's gone off somewhere. There's, people screaming, heads cut open, people having fights outside. It's horrendous. And, if that were to happen on the same scale with cannabis, yes, the impetus for the red-topped kind of scandal-driven publicity would result in cannabis users being vilified even more. And the vilification is a war on people that a certain sector of society don't like. And if patients get caught up in that, then, well, that's an acceptable, friendly fire harm that gets accepted. So I do trust people in general. And I think, yes, there is a better way of managing this based on trust, but we have to accept that there will always be people who come to harm no matter what you do. Whether you act in a certain way or don't act in a certain way, there will always be someone for whom the outcome isn't good. And, there has been a recent coroner's case of a gentleman who unfortunately did die whilst having a medical cannabis prescription, and whom the coroner felt that the medical cannabis was a significant part of it. I don't know the details of the case, but that doctor has been referred to the GMC and must answer to a body of his regulatory peers.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was literally sort of bringing up as we were discussing there. It's Oliver Robinson. It was Greater Manchester North coroner inquest. The coroner was Catherine McKenna. And she said, it's sort of a significant contributory factor, which again is difficult because they represent an office, but they are an individual. It's the same as I was describing, maybe a bit aggressively, my previous experience with that psychiatrist, that they are the psychiatrist, but they are the human that is within that skin, as it were. They wear that role. And so their prejudice, their bigotry, their preconceptions can all inform this. I think this one it's going to be difficult because if I remember correctly, the prescriber was a child psychologist, not an adult psychologist. I think that was one of the things, or the only thing that I saw that is potentially problematic. The rest of it is then about causal correlatory arguments, which obviously medical ethics boards he's going to, like you said, have to defend that. And I think that won't lead to any more of a problem. It should hopefully lead to actually a wider conversation and understanding that times have changed. You can't just you put in an old prejudice into a new box, as it were. You can already see the way that the media jumped on that, certain media, Daily Mail, etc. Daily Mail is potentially, I don't know, you're a psychiatrist, you could probably diagnose them. I think a little bit schizophrenic. One day, cannabis saves the world, best thing ever. The next, the devil's lettuce poisoning our youth. And it just keeps going back and forth. But yeah, you've already faced that with the system as it is. I think that if, as we were speaking of before, there would be more criticism to it. So I can understand the baby steps, the incremental nature to it. This leads on to a conversation that I've wanted to have, and I think you were quite well poised for it, is I feel that the industry is going to face some criticism, not from prescribers, but from the infrastructure. So celebrity brands, online endorsements, the backhanded way they're getting around advertising, advertising, oh, even the language is wrong because it's not legal, it's lawful, but whatever, saying, this thing is available, and then putting their service product next to it, which is just about getting past the marketing guidelines. But things like, no offense to them, Tyson, Big Nasty, do you know what I mean, coming into this, that are cultural individuals, people like Burner and Cookies, these are perceived as titans of the so-called recreational industry in the US and other regions, and the moving here into a purely medical space. Do you think that's potentially problematic? Do you see issues sort of arising here in the future?
Well, to start there, I assume that Tyson and Big Nasty aren't growing these products themselves. I don't think that they're, have a warehouse somewhere.
No, they're endorsements.
Yeah, so they're branding a product that is medicinal, that is out there, produced by, people who are following the correct agricultural manufacturing standards. So, the branding of it, yes, people are influenced by, and we certainly can talk about the power of those social media influencers. And I've noticed it myself. The product that's most recently been highlighted tends to be the one people go for. So there is a certain element of that. I know that there's certain corners of the industry who want to get rid of the silly name, so to speak. Personally, I think that that's the least of our concerns. I think, there are bigger fish to fry here. And actually, that is a parlance, a lexicon, a language that has come out of the illegal market simply because this whole industry was put into the hands of the illegal marketeers. So, they're the ones who took this forward and have developed this parlance for it. And it's a useful way for us to talk within the wider world about what these medications are and the genetics of them and what makes one different from another. So I think it's a useful way of talking about these things. If we were to reduce the names to abbreviations and letters, I think it'd be more difficult to communicate with patients about those. It'd be more difficult to communicate with our international colleagues who are still using those. So there has to be a standardized language we're talking about, because if we just talked about the chemovar, i.e. what percentage of THC, CBD and or terpenes, minor cannabinoids, then that will lose some of that. So it's not that I think that there should be some of these, very extreme names that are out there. But there are some people who understand why they have those extreme names. And if, your population who don't want those, I'm sure that there's a market for someone to come along and have a very straight-laced naming system, a bit like the old Spectrum Red 1, 2 and 4. That is certainly a portion of society that can be accommodated. So I don't think it's the most important thing we should be thinking about is celebrity brands, even though they do have extreme power. But there are divisions of opinion within the medical community who are in this space. We are individuals. We all want the best for patients. We just have different opinions on how to achieve that. And we need to, yes, act as one voice, but not exclude things that may be beneficial based on our own ingrained prejudice and wish to satisfy regulators who have not asked for these, certain changes to be made.
Mm.
There's a lot going on under the surface there, which I won't go into, but I don't think we should be taking anything off the table at this point because we don't know. And I think some clinical humility to know what we don't know may benefit patients by not throwing away formulations and terminology that we just don't like.
Mm. Yeah, I think you made a really valid point around sort of something I've been slowly working on, Connor, put his foot, like kicked me in the arse about it the other day, bless him, and he does every time I get him on the podcast, about writing a book that I've been working on for a few years that starts with basically a glossary of defined terms with the etymology, showcasing where each term kind of comes from, its colloquial use, its dictatorial use, its use in sort of academic research, etc., and then kind of setting a standard term and then sort of writing about it, as it were. Because yourself, you used the term cultivar rather than strain. Big thumbs up. Really appreciate that. So many people are still just saying strain. A lot of the prescribers are still talking about sativa versus indica as well, which in a hybrid market is just bollocks. There are so few pure indica sativas, and even then, because of the complex makeup of our endocannabinoid systems, I mean, I can smoke some pretty heavy, like I used to grow, allegedly, when I may or may not have grown in the past, Alaskan Thunderfuck. For some people, the smell of that makes their ears tingle. It's just like a whoa. It's like chewing coffee beans. It's just like a whoa. But for me, it just goes, oh, okay. It fits well with my ADHD. But for other people, not in the slightest. And it's the same with so some indicas. You know, I mean, I know some people that have like a air quotes sativa response to an indica. Yet you've still got a lot of prescribers, because it's the archaic nature of the legislation, even though it's only 7 years old at this point. The knowledge base has moved on, but it feels like we're now getting to a point that if we don't challenge this, we're just going to self-perpetuate it. And then we're going to end up with a point of, my whole point of the celebrity endorsements was, my issue is around marketing and advertising, and basically the industry's actions or elements of the industry acting in a way that I feel is going to put the entire industry in jeopardy. And I feel that if the big boys are saying, go and look and go, well, outside of the country, all of these people are selling drugs, because that's what they are in our eyes, in our laws. They're selling cannabis, not for medicinal reasons. That's against the law. They're not allowed it. It wasn't until 2020, I think September 2020, when the Financial Conduct Authority were bullied by a law firm I won't name for my own protection, into changing the laws so that so-called medical cannabis companies could invest into the London Stock Exchange. And that's what kind of kickstarted a big move in several of the big players wanting to, set up sticks in the UK and build various production facilities. And I just worry that the Daily Mail is sometimes right in their pointing out of the association of going, well, this is effectively a rec market in a medical guise when you look at it from certain angles. Obviously, like as we've discussed, and I'm trying to be mindful of, the industry does benefit some people. Clearly it does. There are clearly some people that are exploiting it. Yeah, we know this. We spoke of with... Damn it, that was off the record. All right, I can't say that. I'm glad I remembered that though, because that might have put me in trouble. There's other markets that are connected to the UK but not directly in the UK that have got real problems with diversion. Like their rec market has been irreparably dropped, but then they've got people going, "Oh, Doc, I need my 120. Oh, can I get 140 this month, please, Governor?" And it's getting a bit, but if that's not addressed, it's going to lead to a point of going, no, you're all allowed 30 grams or whatever. And the people that legitimately, like, I mean, I can easily go through a few ounces a month, quite easily. Mm-hmm. If you then suddenly go, no, you only allowed this and this, or change, it's the limitations, it's going to lead to limitations that are going to dramatically harm the people who are legitimately benefiting. So my next question, I guess, is there much want and support for, or an understanding that there needs to be a so-called recreational market? There needs to be another market to remove people that are exploiting this current system, so that everybody that's then in your system are the ones you actually can help. Do you know what I mean?
There's always been diversion, and in my training I was astounded that people were diverting antipsychotics for street use, which seems bizarre, but there's a market for everything, and people will divert their medications even though we advise them not to, and the potential harms for that. We accept that, and we don't not prescribe something that's in a patient's interest just because we fear that it may be diverted. But we have to be mindful that if we are aware of diversion, then we should not be prescribing controlled substances to that person. The amounts used, that's a difficult one. And there are people who have used for many years from the illegal market at very, very high doses, and a harm reduction model approach, I think, is the right one to use. But again, you can't write a blank prescription and say, well, you just fill out how much you want, because again, that's a perverse incentive. They'll have their big sort of wheelbarrow mound of cannabis, and very easy for that to then slip into areas where it shouldn't be. One of the concerns with a recreational market from a purely medical perspective is the harms that a recreational market would do to the medical market. So some countries where they do have both, the medical market has suffered because to bring a medical product to market is a lot more expensive and time consuming than it is a recreational market. So people who, may need something medically may decide, oh, well, I'll have recreational, it's as good. Are the oversights equivalent? I couldn't tell you. I'm not in a recreational market. But essentially, people may find it harder, more expensive, and more barriers to get medical supervision and prescriptions were there to be a recreational market. I'm not saying that means we shouldn't do it on a global public health perspective, but there are, again, unintended consequences. There always will be.
Yeah, I think the commodification of cannabis under capitalism means that regardless of what they label it, the people that are producing are always going to seek to make more money. I am forever, and I can hear his accent and hear the champagne glasses clinking at Cannabis Europa when two producers exclaimed to each other how joyous they were at 10 cents a gram out of Colombia. And I know plenty of people. I'm just going to mention the Albanians just because they were straight off the top of my head there, but I've known people of many different nationalities and groups and backgrounds that produce cannabis across the country with various different levels of success and morality. Same thing. What I found out recently about some of the producers up around the northeast, some of the larger growers that are still on the classic Albo production, as they call it, which is the ammo and the dog. Your dog is currently being fed with pig's blood because it's the iron that is bringing out that gas tang in the bottom of it because they've moved away from the ROX hardener. It also triggers some hormonal response in it that's doing something like the excess iron. And urine and the ammonia from urine is being used for the ammo hairs. So it's disgusting. They're doing that to then break that save on feeding to save their money. Obviously, you've then got people getting exploited and trafficked around, etc. And I'm not saying they're equal in the same sense, but I see the same pattern of behaviour of just how much can we get, what happens at the end of it, we don't really care. What's the minimum? So GMP and all the other rules, right, what's the line? We're allowed 0.0? Okay, we'll have 0. Whatever, get 1 point close to it. And I get what you're saying. The US market is the main one. Every time a state then went med first and then went rec after, the producers in that state went, wait a minute, I have 20 less loopholes. I can sell it for twice the price. I'm going to go over there. Why wouldn't I? So do you think that if the medical market wasn't floral, if it didn't have botanicals, if there was actually a plethora, hundreds of cannabinoid-derived products, say what we had with the CBD industry that was starting to come online, if we actually allowed that, but brought that more into the medical sort of realm, and we had these cannabinoid-based pharmaceutical drugs, yes, the research development bring to market, etc. But if these then drugs are purely better than cannabinoids, like that people can derive from just going and buying cannabis from a dispensary, then it'll work out in the end. But it's then about that profit incentive, and we see this with certain illnesses, that erectile dysfunction. How much fucking money goes into erectile dysfunction and hair loss? Versus then the nuance of this real cancer that kills like 95% mortality rate. Oh yeah, but only 5,000 people get that. Millions of people get this. So the money goes, yeah. And so is part of the research development of I still call it the medical cannabis industrial complex, the floral aspect. And if you took away the flower, the funding would go, and then there wouldn't be that research development to create the patented drugs like Epidiolex, sativa, extrabenol, Bedrocan products, etc.
I could foresee that, yes, once there's standardized products for certain conditions with guidance, which meets the nice guideline quality adjusted life year standards and is deemed cost effective by the NHS, that the argument for botanicals will deteriorate. So I think getting ahead of that and having some sort of herbal legislation which provides cannabis within a different structure would be advised. You mentioned the medico-industrial cannabinoid complex. I don't think we're in that stage. I think that's to come, and that's going to be a real game changer for the way that the endocannabinoid system is modulated. At the moment, we're doing it through botanicals, and the people who are producing it, to varying degrees of scientific rigor in various parts of the world, are doing so, in incredibly skillful ways. But, compared to one of the big pharmaceutical giants and the sort of infrastructure, research and, marketing they can then do of that's going to be massively changing the landscape. So I don't necessarily agree that we have a medico-industrial complex in cannabis at the moment. And I'm fearful what that will look like and what that will mean for society at large. Because that will be the Daily Mail acceptable face of cannabinoid medicine, which will probably get some other terminology to make it more palatable and less associated with its murky past.
Well, yeah, I mean, if, as Kevin mentioned a few weeks ago, if Steve Moore gets his way, it's cannabinoids. It's cannabis versus cannabinoids in the same way opium versus opiates. So then we had quite a culture of consuming opium. You mix it with hashish, we made tea from it, we did all sorts. And then, we created hypodermic needle standardization of hydrochloric formulated standard dose drugs. And then there was the whole pure food drug and and then this kind of cultural demonization, the early forms of prohibition, etc. And now these are the accessible points. And what the point was supposed to be was the medical took it away from the cultural exposure. They went, this is bad. The puritanical kind of approach was, you're bad, shouldn't be doing it, but some people benefit, so we'll take it on board. So they went from the large population, we'll make it a small population. Then capitalism gets involved and goes, let's make it a large population. And so actually, because of these compounds being medicalized, as it were, and the industrial complexes behind them, you end up with these problems. I mean, just one compound, oxycodone, made Purdue Pharma $16 billion. And through various, oops, I didn't have it, it's down back of the couch, I've lost it, I don't know, we'll let the company go under. Nobody had to pay that back. Like, that's what I was saying about the thing of the exploitation, and it's going to lead to a problem regardless if it remains unchecked. I agree, and I think that the medical benefit for the people that have no exposure, would never have any exposure to cultural use or anything like that, would gain from the direct practical advice given from their practitioners. But as we mentioned earlier, there isn't that advice or that education there. And so we're in this kind of weird feedback of people going, well, I'm buying it off you. I'm going to you guys and having the appointment and because you know more. Yet some people are lucky enough to be connected to some very well knowledgeable people that have been growing or can grow their own. And so they're kind of going, well, I'm coming to you for the protection of the paper, maybe for my job or to keep my kids or whatever. But your product, it doesn't touch my product, or I'm not interested in your product as it is per se. And I just see these exploits becoming a tapestry that like an overall image that becomes so convoluted and so complex that it can't hold itself up, that we can't keep the lies straight. We can't be like, no, that's hemp over there, and that's a novel CBD compound, and that's a this, and no, that's a street weed, that's a lawful, oh no, but you smoked it, so that's illegal, oh no, but you're not allowed 2 more grams than this, you're in the wrong place, you're 100 yards from a school. Like, it's all this crap that's just going to keep putting on top of it, and we just can't seem to have this rational conversation of, I truly believe a rec market, an adult use market, benefits medical because it takes us lot out of your hands. So when somebody comes to you and talks about cannabis, they know nothing. They saw the advert on TV after, I don't know, whatever's on ITV at like 6-7 o'clock at night, and a deck takeaway, I don't know if that's still on, but do you know what I mean? It's a mainstream thing, and they come to you and you're not going to have this conflict. You're not going to have these issues with them patients arguing back,
There's a couple of themes to pick up there. I think, firstly, we are seeing a bit of a switch in the attitude of some of the larger, more clinics who provide, sort of limited oversight of patients, shall we say, in that some patients are now being declined at an early stage because they are too complex or deemed to be more risky than others. Indeed, I've heard of some patients going for their regular review and suddenly saying, we don't now prescribe for someone with your profile of problem. as a result of the coroner's case we mentioned about this very sad case. And so there may be this sort of undertone that very simple, straightforward cases do go to these larger clinics with less oversight and get that medication under a medical guise and not a recreational guise, but have mild problems. And then people with more complex problems need to go somewhere else and potentially, have more intense support at a higher cost with more restrictions. So there is that kind of emerging field now as a result of recent cases. So I've got another point, but if you don't know whether you want to come back on that one.
No, the thing that my brain was just kind of screaming there was going like, so there's weed everywhere. Guy comes to you and goes, I'm thinking about using weed. And so you guys have, GMP, good manufacturer, standardized product, and practitioner's advice, and the system goes no, because they're protecting their, frankly, financial interest. When you really extrapolate out what is going on there, that guy then has all he's going to do. Dave, I always call my dealer Dave. Just so happens you're Dave today. But Dave, can I get an eighth of what you got? Oh yeah, Dave sells weed. He doesn't even give it a cultivar name. It's just weed to Dave, and he goes and gets it. He's still going to have that access. Is it not better to be inside that system where then he can have that honesty? Like, I've been lucky, touch wood. Out of the 4 prescribers I've had, I've only had one of them be a problem. Cure Relief, when they had an interdisciplinary team meeting and kicked me off because I was flagrantly abusing their packaging and flouting their something or other. I can't remember the full thing of it. But the other prescribers I've had at a clinic, I'm not going to name so this doesn't come back and bite me on the arse, I've been able to be honest with them and go, look, can I tell you if I grow or not? Can I tell you how I actually use cannabis? Can I actually give you my background, or are you going to screw me over? And I've been lucky that they've been like, well, I'm here to learn. And I'm like, fuck, let's have a good conversation about cannabis. And
I would agree. I learned so much from patients, and, that's one of the benefits of being a clinician is you see, dozens, hundreds, thousands of patients. You start to pick up on patterns, and that influences your clinical curiosity to then explore these areas further and have that sort of aha, waking in the middle of the night moment where you go, I know I should be doing X, Y, and Z to further the scientific cause. But in a regulated system, the great advantage is that if Dave wasn't friendly Dave down the road, Dave was dodgy Dave, then, there is a regulatory process for that person to lose their license in the same way as a doctor might lose their license if they're a bad actor or a publican or anything else, that there is a consequence rather than dodgy Dave just continually peddling his spice lead and CBD bud as the real thing and the best thing ever, which every dealer, I'm pretty sure, says this is the best thing ever. And
top shelf, 11 out of 10, bro.
Puts it in a Cali bag and sells it for twice the price.
Oh, believe me, I've had my fun with the vendors over the past decade. It's difficult because, like you said, about where light doesn't shine, darkness falls. But we can't then shine light everywhere. We can't create a panopticonic reality, and for all they're fucking trying, we shouldn't create a panopticonic reality. But there needs to be that oversight. And if there was then that regulated sort of rec market, I mean, foods are then regulated, so you can go to your supermarket, buy your onions or whatever, but you can still go down the allotments and go to Mike or whoever and, can I have some of your onions? And he can go, here's some onions. And you go, Mike, I appreciate that so much. I'll donate you £5. It's not a commercial transaction in the same sort of way. It's not regulated in the same sort of way, but it's tolerated and allowed. And I just want to see that spectrum of the system. But if there wasn't the mass producers that are not in the medical bracket were licensed in the same way as, like I said, as pubs are, that then it needs that infrastructure, and then if there is a complaint made, it has to then be investigated, etc. But it still allows the discretion of the activity until kind of there is a complaint, as it were, that it self-governs in that way, but within a hierarchical legal framework. So I see that would, again, like I said, benefit you guys, because then for that to exist, we would have to have rational traffic laws, which means so many of the people that are just being like, oh, well, this keeps me driving, wouldn't be in that system, which again would free up space, would free up resources. Obviously, yes, as we've discussed, I think some of the financing would maybe divert over, But if then it could be more closely brought into line with the rest of the sort of pharmaceutical global industrial complex, that's endless money. Endless money. If it suddenly goes into that side, rather than just leaning over going, if we get med first, we can come in and build all these dispensaries, I think that'll change and expand for the benefit of the patients, the medical side sort of the industry. What was your other point from before, if you can remember?
I did talk about some of the larger clinics now restricting the complexity of patients as a result of essentially what it is, fearfulness of governance entanglements.
Yeah, so no, you had another point to that, so I came back on that, and then you said there's something else.
Whether the losing your license, the regulatory system that's set up, that dodgy Dave selling dodgy things, can continue to do so because there is no comeback on them to be pulled into line. And the practices which may be harmful, and we know with the vape cartridges causing bubble lung in the USA was vitamin E acetate, which was the cause, which should never be used within vape cartridges, and it was only because there was an illegal market driving this that harmful substance was included, which caused untold harm to people, which still resonates today. Still have people worrying that a vape cartridge will cause these problems.
Yeah, 100%, and it's bad actors in all spaces. And like I said, the more dark and dubious a space, and as I think Neil Woods describes it really well in his first book of the arms race that was created by Prohibition. So it started off and it was all hippie Daves. It was all just way big weed leaf on, like way, and he learned about the plant and he grew the plant and he found out the best way to produce it and to dry it and to cure it and to pass it around to people, and he's like, nah, I'll give you a little bit extra. And it was, you could go to him and go, actually, Dave, do you want to swap it? And and there's an accountability and a relationship there. And then the cops and the criminalisation happened, and then all the good Daves went, and then to replace that Dave came in a more paranoid Dave that kind of meet you with his hood up in an alleyway, and then they started getting that Dave, and then the police would start infiltrating drug gangs, so then violence had to come in, so you had to scare all of your own and it just all of this was created by the legal framework, not by the drugs or even, I believe, by human instinct. Some people move into it. Even now, the cartels that we talk about, like in Mexico and shit, are only a few thousands of strong, like less than 100,000 people of actual like cartel members. Yes, there's peripheral bodies, and I'd include that into that number. Yet we're seen as that is the drug market. There's 8 billion people on this planet. Look at the percentage on the math on that. Yeah, how many other people are then dealing drugs or in connected and being able to provide, especially for something like cannabis, which can clandestinely be produced relatively easy. Nobody's over here, no, that I know of anybody's over here growing cocaine. It's too much of a long commitment, too much of an energy resource, too much of a drain when you just get it from source. Whereas if then, as Bolivia and Colombia are looking at creating domestic industries, or Johnson & Johnson looking at creating a cocaine-derived or analog as a medical product, we're moving towards these things coming, and there's just going to be this struggle. And I think that's all we're seeing with cannabis is that as more people move into the medical side of it and more of the money goes that way, all of the good money, not good money, the clean money that was involved in funding cannabis and drugs from the aristocracy and the well-ups, go watch the Guy Ritchie movie, The Gentleman, and get an idea of how the aristocracy have been involved. And this is some interesting stories about GW that Kevin Jones will be able to tell you about in previous episode, guys. Once that moves into legitimate investments, it can only then be more and more dodgy money. And then this whole thing of like exploited labor and everything else, it's common practice in this space, obviously, to maximize profit. But like I said, of those guys in Colombia, they're in Lathos and all these other spots. Do you think they're really growing there because they've got the best weed? Do you think they've gone over there and spent the millions to lobby that government? No, it's because the labor costs are on the goddamn floor. Like, I see the same thing sort of on all sides, and I get and I understand. I'm frustrated by the binaries that are created by this. There's these divisional sides when we're not set opposed. We're a yin and a yang. We're part of the same thing, and that we would benefit both greatly. Because the other side of it is, if a rec market was proportionately taxed, we could just fund you guys. 20 pence out of every pound on a gram going to direct research and development of domestically owned cannabinoid-based products to build then a national what's called portfolio of prescribable drugs that we could license as a country, I'm all for that. But to get Merrick and all them guys some more fucking money, hell no. Like, people like yourself, and they've gone and gone, this space, we can provide these services. I want to see vertical integration that's beneficial to the community for people like yourself. So that instead of some, going to use some expletives there, some individuals that I may not be in favour of coming over here and setting up various different spots and just trying to, ink that money out, that you guys could actually go, well, we're in Wales. Why don't we get, work with the government and and local builders, and we can then build that cannabis literally, like I said, can grow anywhere. So Wales should be benefiting from domestic cannabis. So should Scotland. So should
would absolutely love that. As a devolved nation, we're in charge of our own healthcare service. Wales tends to be quite small C conservative in terms of its approach to these sorts of things, and I would like to see it. Will I see it? That's open for debate. And any AMs watching, please get in touch. We'll have a discussion. But as the only clinic in Wales, and there's no pharmacy in Wales, we're out there. And, we put ourselves out there 5 years ago, and we're still here, still doing what we're doing, still finding that patients are having phenomenal responses to this. But really, this is something that should be a part of mainstream medicine and be one of the tools in the armory, because the medical profession has loads of great tools in the armory. I just saw this was an area that was so tragically underserved that I felt that if I get involved and do as much as I can in this space, then hopefully that will help to develop the discussion further. And I am disappointed it's not gone further than it has. I have spoken to people at the Royal College. I've, spoke to people in my old NHS jobs, and, there's no appetite for anyone to be looking into this in a serious manner. It's still, let's say, through people's own opinions and lack of training and prejudice, still on the fringes and considered, in the words of one consultant I spoke to, isn't that all hoo-hoo? So, it's just the simple, biological fact of an endocannabinoid system and generations of prohibition and prejudice coming head to head.
Yeah, it's interesting watching science and belief kind of collide in this way, and seeing the individuals it manifests in, because it often surprises me, some people that are quite, academically minded, quite well-read, learned individuals will have this sense of bigotry that no matter what science you present to them, no matter how many studies you send them or stats you quote them, you can't kind of get beyond that. I think there's the saturation points. I think more people need to be curious, and I think the youth are driving that a lot. Younger people saying to parents, Mum, have you considered this? Would you look at this? In America, that have been for a long time, the largest growing demographic of cannabis consumers are the over 50s. Obviously, as we've discussed with kind of them winding down opioid prescriptions and things like that, people are looking for alternatives. I mean, I walked into a home the other day of some very well-to-do individuals as I'm collecting data to archive for the Albert Green project, and they were talking with the guests sort of round about how it's the vino that keeps us young, and this guy sort of quipped, "No, it's Jack for me. It's got to be the Jack." And we kind of had this conversation about like medicinal alcohol, as it were, or the conceptual idea of, and so that's what a lot of their generation are doing. They recognize, no, I don't want to be taking all those pills. I'm not going to name the woman. She said to me, I don't want to rattle. I don't want to rattle when I walk. And she went, but the wine helps with da-da-da. And I held my tongue. I didn't go the whole carcinogen, and they just kind of joked amongst themselves about like moderation. And so there is this gap, but without these people being able to be reached. I mean, they're the demographic reading the paper, and they're opening the Daily Mail and going, so cannabis kills you. So cannabis saves you. So cannabis kills you. Like, you can understand how they have this issue. I think obviously looking at recent sort of political polls, Plaid Cymru looks in a pretty strong position. I think as Labour collapses, I don't think the Greens have got going to have as strong as a rise domestically in Wales. Same with Scotland, to be fair. And I think, to be honest, they're not going to want to. In a lot of ways, they're going to see a potential for sort of rainbow coalition, as it were, in various quarters. But I think as there is the move more, it's a product. It's a magic money tree, as Theresa May, quipped about. You literally can grow gross domestic product. So yeah, do you think an independent Wales would be sort of more?
It could be under the right kind of leadership who would be open to this, and there are individuals within the political spectrum in Wales who are sympathetic to this. And the late great Paul Flynn was a shining beacon from Newport back in the day, who really pushed this within Westminster, and Wales has a strong tradition of fair play. Chwarae teg. Fair play is sort of something which we as a nation really value, and this current situation goes against that. It's inherently wrong that people are being prevented from treating their health with available products. How that looks, I don't know, but the inequalities that simply come out of this system for people who have access, people who can afford it, people who are aware of these. You have to have a certain level of education to be aware that this is even an option, to overcome your own internal barriers, to address private healthcare, which with the NHS failing to provide many services, now people are looking at other options. The Wales could go down that route. Whether it will remains to be seen.
Sorry, I just had a thought there. I was going to write down, but I hear an opportunity to speak it. ADHD in the UK, because of the backlog and people exploiting using the system to, what the hell do they call it? Right to choose, to then go into then private, to then get an assessment, and then going back into the NHS and being refused treatment. Do you think that could be something that could potentially happen with cannabis, as more of the non-cannabis side of the medical establishment kind of looks at this, as we said, with them kind of closing ranks is maybe not the right phrasing, but becoming more cautious given recent events, that there could become this position where they kind of go, we're not working with you, like, we don't accept you, as it were?
Yeah, I think for starters, Wales doesn't have right to choose, so that's something which England has, which we don't. Right. And I think there's a lot of patients who are concerned about that, especially with ADHD. But to take on the sort of risks that an independent prescriber takes on when prescribing medical cannabis is not something which the majority of doctors would want to do. The whole idea is to minimise the risks to you as a practitioner. And so, yes, you're putting your head above the parapet. There's very few practitioners who are in this space compared to the amounts of people who could potentially be in this space. So it'd take an overhaul of, people's mindset, clinicians' mindsets, who basically want to be in their NHS job and do really valuable work, getting those ADHD, waiting list numbers down, and want that kind of life where there is a structure there that supports them. As an independent prescriber in the private sector now, you start to value exactly what the NHS was providing there, because you are solely responsible for this. And to have more people coming into this area with the inherent risks, we need to provide our own structures to support each other in that. So there is scope for, I think, clinicians to be developing their own support networks. And, that's something which I am in discussions with some of my colleagues, in supporting each other in psychiatry.
Mm-hmm. No, interesting. I just thought of it there, because I hear quite a lot from people, and I read quite a lot of comments, obviously, in various groups and things like that, and try and keep abreast of most things, that some people in various sort of nuanced fields of health are finding, again, I guess, as we spoke of before, almost a bigotry or an ignorance, and then refusing other treatments, saying, cannabis could detrimentally affect this treatment, or there could be an interaction with this drug, or a contraindication rather. So I can understand, but I still.
There's an absolute division. There's some doctors who say, okay, you're taking medical cannabis from a private prescriber. Suddenly, the entire responsibility of your care is now with that private prescriber, and that's not the case. Simply because you go for a private hip operation doesn't mean you then can't get your analgesia via your GP. There is a responsibility in law for healthcare professionals and social care professionals to share information in order to help the patient in a professional manner. So there's that legal obligation. People can't just duck that and go, well, that's cannabis. I don't want to know about that. I don't know anything about that. I don't know how it interacts. So I'm going to hide my head in a clinical incuriosity. So, I think that isn't a sustainable or responsible position for any prescriber, NHS physician or prescriber to be in who does not want to engage in this conversation. I think that would be a route for people to identify their professional learning needs via their appraisal, which they must do every year in order to be revalidated with the GMC. So it's if you identify that there's an area which you don't know enough about, which is relevant to your practice, it's on you to seek methods to fill that gap.
Do you think that could be something as you were speaking of, sort of if the clinic's creating their own internal sort of support network? Obviously, there's got so many numbers I'm flying through my brain. Are we at 33, 34 clinics? 33, 34? Something like that in the UK at the minute. So if you were to build up that network and have then a common awareness of problems that you're all facing, because I imagine if you got all of you prescribers into one room and you start going, well, what's the main thing you're hearing? Like you said about pattern recognition before, you'd all quite quickly realise some common problems the patients are having that, as we found with Umesh recently, testifying on behalf of a patient, your specialist credentials have weight, especially in front of people who have no knowledge of this and are ignorant of it. So there could be sort of guidance or identifying in areas and going, actually, we've looked at it and these people dealing with, I don't know, big toe pain. Obviously, that's not a department, but you know what I mean? They're really ignorant of it. Can we write to their overarching board? Do you know what I mean? And give them access to information, etc. And
realistically, that's what the Royal Colleges should be doing. They
should be, but they're kind of doing this.
They should have specialist working groups within the field of cannabinoid medicine for their particular Royal College. We have specialist interest groups in psychiatry for sports medicine and spirituality and private practice. There are already these systems in place that cannabinoid medicine needs to fit into, because it's not a small shift. It's not a drift of information that could potentially benefit. It's a shift of information that could potentially revolutionize the treatment of people using a hitherto unheard of system in the body. That should be cause for celebration. We've found a new system. We've got a new set of tools to work with that'll take generations to really start to uncover. So this is an exciting time. And it's just the cautious, nervous skepticism of essentially regulatory bodies, royal colleges, who are not grasping this opportunity in a way that I think would be best for patients.
I suppose I'm mindful of sort of the time here, but I do want to ask, without maybe getting too conspiratorial, which I'm maybe prone to do sometimes, why do you think that is? Why do you think there is this kind of, not a pushback, just a hesitancy that becomes problematic in some areas? Like it's...
Well, medicine, as with any sort of human system, we build structures based on, giants of the past, and medicine is no different to that. And we can trace the benefits and the progress that's been made, and where people, haven't, followed the correct routes, or they've made assumptions which later turn out to be incorrect, that it can self-navigate and self-correct. And so what we had was a lot of therapies being used which weren't effective, that some of these advanced statistical models suddenly shed light on, and then everyone goes, wow, this is amazing. This is an incredible sort of tool to view human medicine. and let's use that to whack every single problem we see. And now cannabis comes along with a different sort of structure which doesn't fit into that. And so they go, well, we've got this really great hammer, but cannabis is a screw that needs a screwdriver. And so the tools at our disposal need to be reinvented to make it adapt to the therapeutic potential we have. Not the reverse that, what we need to do is isolate all those compounds and put it through our randomized controlled trial. So I think that leaves so much on the table that patients could be benefiting from. We have something right here, right now that could benefit huge numbers of people. Well, let's turn that into an effective therapy now. Let's not wait 10, 20 years to find, little bits of benefit. And it's because of that propaganda, prejudice, stereotype, unjust legislation that has led us to this point. And let's have humility and contrition and say, okay, as a society, we got it wrong. This is actually quite beneficial for a lot of people, but needs to be handled as any potentially harmful substance could do. But what we've got now isn't working. Apologies, let's do better.
God, if only. If only. All right, excellent. Thank you. I've learned a good few things there. I've enjoyed this conversation. I think we have exhausted all of the kind of questions and queries, and we're just about 2 hours, so we've done all right there. Where can, if people are interested in becoming a patient of the Cardiff Cannabis Clinic, or if they want to follow your work or anything, where can people keep up with you online or connect with you online?
Yeah, we have a website, cannabiscliniccardiff.co.uk. I'm Dr Dave Howells. I run this service with my wife, Sam Ashton, who's a medical patient. We are a mental health specific clinic. So we only deal with mental health. We deal with some quite complex patients and comorbidities. We're really keen to have people of all spectrums, people who, not only are currently using cannabis, but, are not using cannabis or never use cannabis, and for people who have comorbidities and polypharmacy, so lots of medications. And that's where I see, the greatest benefit for people as a whole would be those complex patients who are on multiple medications, who aren't getting the benefit that they require. Older people, I think, are absolutely where I would love to focus my attention on, because those are people who, have so many problems which could be helped by this one therapy. So that's where I'd like our service to be sort of evolving into, and where the biggest professional bang for my buck is. And I will continue to support, the revolution of cannabinoid medicine in a way that's good for patients, and hopefully we can get societal change which does reduce the stigma, prejudice, stereotype, and reverse the harms of generations of prohibition.
Here, damn here. Excellent. I'll include some links below for people. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much, Dave.
Well, thank you, Simpa. It's been a pleasure from my side as well. Keep up the good work.
Oh, thank you. All the best. Peace and love.
Bye.
Well, there you go, folks. That was Dr. David Howells. I hope you enjoyed that one and learned something new. I was trying to be gentle. I'm trying to bring on more people from, again, as you know me, I termed the medical cannabis industrial complex, or from sort of the prescription cannabis industry, or sector. So I'm trying to not be so anti. Obviously, you guys know me. I have the odd issue with the industry and kind of with the way that I see things going, with the artificial binaries that it creates, with the loopholes that are being exploited, and the people that are falling through the cracks. The many at this point, still millions of people falling through the cracks. But yeah, I thought that was a good conversation. We covered some good aspects. It was good to talk with a psychiatrist as a prescriber as well, a psychiatric prescriber, because he also few of them in the UK. Didn't mean that to turn into an impromptu therapy session for me with Dr. Dave there for a minute, although it was mostly sort of in jest, or at least the way I delivered it. My frustration is still very much real, the state of the situation, but I understand how divesting in the NHS for decades is going to result in problematic issues, and obviously with then private healthcare effectively, headhunting talent, and then obviously immigration restrictions post-Brexit has meant that a lot of our healthcare professionals that have come from overseas have then left as well. So yeah, I can see why we're in the state that we are with that. It was good to get a bit of insight into kind of how that side of the world, again, I don't like this idea of sides, but how kind of the industry itself sees current events or recent events, and kind of how that might result in, restrictions upon the industry, restrictions upon prescribing, etc. It was good to hear that there's some commonality in sort of our trepidation and worries, and quite an alignment in our sort of beliefs as to what could solve a lot of these problems in terms of, having a robust, regulated adult market. Obviously, I would obviously want full decriminalisation, obviously, for personal cultivation and trade, again, a la allotments and fruits and vegetables, etc. Carb booty, that sort of thing. And obviously, if there was then a mass market, there wouldn't be the incentive or the margins really, or the financial incentive to mass produce an unregulated product. So yeah, hope you guys learned something from that. I'll include links below. I think there's a couple of news stories as well, featuring Dave and I think his partner's name was Sarah, he said there at the end. That I'll include below as well, so you can read a bit more on their backstory. Yeah, hope you enjoyed that one. If you did, please give us a like, a share, subscribe, a heart, a thumbs up, whatever it is you do on whatever platform it is that you enjoy this podcast on. I appreciate it and appreciate you. Check us out on patreon.com/The Simpa Life, where for less than a cup of coffee a week, you can help me keep the lights on this little project of mine. Check us out on at thesimpalife.com for exclusive blogs and articles, and on social media at The Simpa Life. All right, we'll be back next week with, I don't know, somebody. It'll be awesome. You'll love it. I'll love it. All right, take it easy. Peace and love, folks.